Okay, chapter 5 is over roots and soil. So the root anchors, the root anchor plants absorb water and minerals in solutions, and a germinating seed radical becomes the first root. So tap roots with branched roots or adventitious roots that become a fibrous root system develop from the radical or the stem just above it. And many plants have a combination of both systems. So on the left, you can see the taproot system over here. You can see to the right, you'll see the fibrous system. And then further on to the right, you will see the radical coming out of the seed that has sprouted. You can also see the seminal roots and the coleoptile. So there are 4 zones or regions of young roots that are recognized. There's your protective cap root that also aids in the perception of gravity. There's a 2 is a region of cell division. It's your apical meristem that subdivides into the protoderm, which produces the epidermis. A ground meristem, which produces the cortex. A procambium, which produces the primary xylem and the primary phloem. You have this picture also in your text. And 3, which is a region of elongation in which the cells produced by the apical meristem become considerably longer and slightly wider. And number 4 is a region of maturation in which the cells mature into the distinctive cell types of the primary tissues. So look at the diagram, and over on the left-hand side, you'll see that whole section there is your root cap. And then on the right, if we go from the bottom up, you'll see the apical meristem, region of cell division. Now this is on a root. Today in lab, we looked at on a shoot. The next region up is the region of elongation, and then the next one is the region of maturation. Okay, root hairs. So some of the epidermal cells in the region of maturation develop root hairs. And the root hairs greatly increase the absorptive surface of the root. That means the surface area increases. And the tissue that mature in this region are similar to those of stem tips. But pith is absent in most dicot roots and originates from the procambium in the monocot roots. So in the diagram, you can see a root hair. You can see the little nucleus in it. On the right, they actually break down the parts better for you. You know what an epidermal cell is. There's your root hair, a vacuole within the cell, and then a nucleus. Okay, at its inner boundary, the cortex has an endodermis with a Casparian strip made of lignin and suberin. So you can see the little things sprouting out. Those are your root hairs again. And if you will, let's see, the next layer in, that's just your root epidermis. That's on the same layer that the root hair is. The next one in is your exodermis or the hypodermis. Let's see, they're pointing to the cell wall, which is the outside of the epidermis. The suberin laminae, that's the sections that are outlined in yellow for you. The endodermis is like this second ring here in yellow on the inside, and the Casparian strips are marked in red for you in both that outer and inner ring. And let's see, it labels the center cylinder also. Okay, and it's next to the, we're going to talk about the periderm, but next to the endodermis, towards the center of the root are the parenchyma cells constituting the pericycle. And the branch roots and the vascular cambium arise in the pericycle. So this shows your epidermis on a cross section of a slide. You can see the bigger openings here, that's your xylem. And then you can see your phloem down here. This whole region from the pericycle to the epidermis, that is called your cortex. And then it also labels the endodermis for you. Okay, this is a slide of cross sections of a dicot root. So in the dicot roots, the primary xylem usually first forms a solid core with 2 to several arms in the center of the root, part that looks like the cross. A pith may be present in the monocot roots, and this is a cross section on the right of a ranunculus, and basically that's a buttercup flower as just a common name. So this is in the root of a dicot. So you can see the cortex, you can see it on the outer ring, and then you can see it on the inner ring. You can see the xylem, that's the larger white parenchyma cells in the middle. Then you see the phloem, and then the endodermis. So next we're going to talk about cork tissue. Primary phloem first is produced in discrete patches between the primary xylem arms, but the tissues eventually appear as concentric cylinders. So in woody plants, a cork cambium usually arises in the pericycle and produces cork tissues similar to those of stems. Roots may graft together naturally, and there are no leaves in the roots. So these are cross sections of root slides. If you look on the left, they did a really good job of labeling everything. You can see the endodermis with the Casparian strips. They're just not in red on this one for you. You can see your epidermis, the cortex. You can see where your phloem, where your cambium is, your xylem, your pericycle, and the phloem, cambium, xylem, and pericycle. That's all your vascular cylinder, or that is also called a stele. On the colored slide, you can see the pericycle, and then you can actually see where you've got that red outlining it. That is your lateral root that's fixing to grow and protrude outside of that root and branch off. So your specialized roots, those include those for food and water storage. So pneumatophores, aerial roots, vellum roots, prop roots, photosynthetic roots, and adventitious roots. Then you've got contractile roots and buttress roots, haustoria or peg-like, parasitic roots, and mycorrhizae are mutualistic associations between roots and fungi. So some plants have nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the nodules of their roots. Okay, root crops. Root crops can include things like sugar beets, turnips, rutabagas, parsnips, carrots, sweet potatoes, yams. There are several spices that are obtained from roots. Other uses of roots include the production of alcohol, the extraction of dyes, drugs, insecticides, and poisons. And there are some states that actually use beet juice to actually put on the roads the same way that we do salt down here for ice. So soils contain a mixture of ingredients, and they include sand, rocks, silt, clay, humus, dead organic matter, plant roots, small animals, microorganisms, air, and water within the pore spaces. A vertical column of soil exhibits horizons, and the top soil is divided into an upper A horizon. You can see that the second one down on the diagram. The B horizon is the subsoil, and it usually contains more clay and is lighter in color than the topsoil. And the C horizon, which is a little bit further down on the bottom portion, constitutes the weathered soil plant material. So living organisms in the soil decompose organic matter, and the source of most important plant nutrients. So the living organisms decompose organic matter, and this is the source of most important plant nutrients. Your animals also cultivate the soil, and your soil erosion is affected by topography. I put this diagram in here because I thought it showed some really good examples. If you take a little bit of time and you look, you can see the landslide, the debris flow, mud flow. You can see the soil creep. Notice how the electrical poles are starting to lean. You can probably, notice this driving around after all this rain. Sheet and rill erosion, and gully formation. So soil texture pertains to the relative proportions of sand, silt, and clay. And more than half of the composition by weight of mineral matter is oxygen. Soil structure is the arrangement of soil particles into aggregates, and good soils are highly granular, and they have pore spaces that constitute about half the total volume. Water in the soil occurs as hygroscopic water, gravitational water, and capillary water. And the field capacity of the soil is the amount of water that remains after the rest of the water has drained away by gravity. So soil reaches the permanent wilting point when plants wilt because they can no longer extract enough water from the soil for their needs. And available water is soil water between field capacity and the permanent wilting point. So you notice on the saturation to the left, all the pores are full of water, and gravitational water is lost because it drains out. Gravity pulls it down. And then somebody tell me the next time we meet about gravity. I want to know if you know those numbers. Field capacity is the available water for plant growth. And wilting point, no more water is available to the plants. Okay, now let's just go over some review questions. That tree that you see there that fell over in my front yard a couple of years ago during a storm, you can see the massive root ball on that. It actually blocked 2 streets. Fire department had to come and cut it apart and move it off the road. Okay, got a lot of things on this handout. Okay, let's look at some possible review questions. So if we talked about a root system and how does that function? Well, it functions because which way? You've got anchorage and storage through growth, absorption and conduction, and production of new roots. All of those things are the way a root system may function. So in addition to anchoring a plant, roots usually function directly in which of the following processes? Well, that's going to be the absorption of minerals in a solution. Your typical root system forms up to, what do we say, 1/3 of the total dry biomass of a plant. That is a lot. Look back at the picture on the slide here. That's a lot of root system. That is 1/3 the dry biomass of the tree. Your radicle is a part of your embryo seed, and your taproot systems develop from that radicle. The adventitious roots are your roots that develop from an organ other than from an existing root. And your monocots, such as your grasses, usually have a fibrous root system. And the perception of gravity by a root takes place where? It takes place in the root cap. In the traversing the root to the central xylem vessels, the last living tissue that water passes through before entering the xylem is the pericycle. And the cells of the apical meristem are usually cuboidal in shape. The tissues that are adjacent to the endodermis towards the center of the root is the pericycle. So if you were given a choice between fibers, tracheids, vessels, stone cells, and passage cells, which would be relatively thin-walled? Well, that would be that passage cell is going to be the thinnest walled of those. So what your endodermis is a tissue that's common in your roots, but it's not in the stems. Okay, parts of the pericycle and the parenchyma between the arms of the xylem and the patches of phloem in young roots. See a fly. Sorry, got sidetracked. Parts of the pericycle and the parenchyma between the arms of the xylem and patches of phloem in young roots of many dicots and conifers become your vascular cambium. And cork is the most abundant cell type in your periderm. And when trees undergo root grafting with one another, an unfortunate result can be what? What might happen? Well, disease might spread to healthy trees. And root hairs are prominent in the region of maturation. So what aids the perception of gravity by the roots? Well, that's those amyloplasts. And the rhythmic cell division in young roots often reaches a peak once or twice a day. Your cells of an endodermis that do not have a Casparian strip, those are your passage cells. And the tissues in which cork cambium develop in woody dicot roots are your pericycle. So the cells of the root caps cease the growth of, not cease, ease. The cells of the root cap ease the growth of young roots through the soil by producing a, excuse me, mucilaginous lubricant. And the region of cell division in a root is also known as the root apical meristem. And the regions of elongation is characterized by the increase in the size of the cells. So let's look at how lateral roots differ from root hairs. Lateral roots have a root cap, root hairs do not. Lateral roots are formed of many cells, and root hairs are single cell. Lateral roots from the pericycle form from the pericycle, while root hairs develop in the region of maturation. And your lateral roots may live for many months, but your root hairs only live for a few days. So when we're looking at the monocot and the dicot root structure, the dicot roots lack a central pith region. That's the easiest way to tell them apart. The root hairs are found in the region of the root called the region of maturation. And pith is present in monocot roots, but absent in dicot roots. And one unique function of the root cap is the sensing of gravitational force. Why do you think that would be important? And your root hairs are both specialized epidermal cells, and they increase the surface area for the absorption of water. So your stored food, especially starch and other carbohydrates in storage roots, can be found in the, what are we looking for? Stored food, especially starch. Where can they be found? Found in the cortex. And a unique feature of the pericycle is that it's retention of the meristematic potential and the production of lateral roots. So let's talk about some specialized roots. If we were talking about food storage of like a sweet potato, that's a specialized root. The prop root of corn, that's a specialized root. A contractile root, a propagative root, those are all specialized roots. Specialized roots that permit aquatic plants to facilitate gas exchange, those are your pneumatophores. And buds that develop on roots are usually referred to as the adventitious. The root-like projections of parasitic plants that develop along their stems and penetrate the host plant's tissues are called haustoria. So let's talk about the different things that are present in dicot roots. You've got xylem, phloem, epidermis, and cortex. We also get a lot of our different spices from different roots, things like licorice, sassafras, sarsaparilla. Is a carriage a storage root? Carrot's a biennial too. Yes, it is. Your A horizon in the soil is going to be the most important layer of the soil agriculturally. And the best soil for plant growth is the loam. And your water that drains out of the pores in the soils after rain is called gravitational water. Good agricultural soils are granular soils with pore spaces that occupy 40 to 60% of the total volume of the soil. And if we talk about the arrangement of soil particles into groups that are called aggregates, we're referring to the soil structure. So if we talk, we've had a lot of rain, a lot of flooding this week. So when we look at what too much water will do to the soil, it will deplete mineral nutrients, it slows mineralization, it interferes with plant growth, and it accelerates the breakdown of the nitrates that are in the soil. The soil water field capacity and the permanent wilting point, that is our available water that we have for the plants. So pith tissue is absent in dicot roots. Soil parent material extends down to the bedrock. And clay particles have a negative electronic charge, which tend to retard water drainage and retain positively charged ions. A little factoid here, when I took pottery in college, we spent weeks having to actually learn the science behind the different particles of soil, and on clay, it's shaped more like this. That's why when they're combined together, if you hit it, and it's more slick than the other types of soil. So soil bacteria and fungi are important components of soil because they contribute to porosity and they release usable minerals by decomposing organic matter. And liming is something that we do to counteract the acidity in the soil. And when a seed germinates, the part of the embryo that develops into the first root is called the radicle. And the outer cells of a root cap secrete mucilage. Grasses generally produce a fibrous root system, and the Casparian strips are composed primarily of suberin. And the natural grafting between roots of different trees in the same species is well known in the tropics. Plant root systems can detect and respond to gravity anywhere from 30 minutes to a few hours. One more, the vascular tissue of new lateral, or these are your branch roots, connects with the vascular tissue of the older root for continuous conduction of water and minerals. Okay, so you guys can see how important it is for you to know all of the terminology, know where it is and what it does. See you guys next week.